A professor, renowned for his sharp wit and intellect, stands before a room full of students, ready to challenge anyone who dares to step up. But what if, in this very moment, the professor unknowingly targets someone he believes is an easy target, someone he thinks is just the son of a famous billionaire? This is the story of Barron Trump, a young man who, despite his background, possesses a mind far beyond anyone's expectations. What happens when a professor tries to mock Barron in a math class, not realizing he's about to face a genius who's about to change the game? Professor Thompson, a seasoned academic, known for his sharp tongue and unshakable confidence, stood in front of the class. He had no idea that the quiet young man sitting in the back, Barron Trump, was about to turn the tables. With a smirk, Professor Thompson posed a complex math problem, one he believed no one could solve without deep struggle. "All right, let's see if anyone can crack this," he said. Looking around the room, the students exchanged glances, sensing the challenge. Barron, usually reserved, raised his hand. The professor paused, a little surprised. It wasn't often that anyone in the class volunteered so quickly. He assumed Barron was simply looking for a quick moment of attention. "Yes, Barron?" the professor asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. Without hesitation, Barron stood up. "I'll take a shot at it," he said, his voice calm but with a spark of determination. The room fell silent, everyone now focused on him, waiting to see how this would play out. The professor, amused, said, "All right, go ahead, impress us." Barron calmly approached the whiteboard, grabbed a marker, and without a second thought, began solving the problem step by step. The students looked at each other, confused. The professor watched, clearly expecting a mistake or some hesitation. But Barron's pencil moved swiftly, his mind calculating with ease as if he had done this type of problem 1,000 times before. Minutes passed, and the complex math problem that had baffled the class began to dissolve under Barron's steady hand. The professor's expression shifted from confidence to bewilderment. He couldn't believe it. Barron was solving the equation with precision, his logic flawless, his approach more advanced than even the professor himself had expected. When Barron finished, he turned to face the class. The silence was deafening. The problem was solved, not just correctly, but with an elegance that left everyone in awe. The professor stood there, stunned, unable to find words. Barron had not just solved the problem, he had shown everyone, including the professor, that appearances can be deceiving. The professor, still in shock, slowly walked up to the whiteboard, staring at the flawless solution Barron had just presented. He had made a mistake in underestimating him, and the reality was starting to sink in. This wasn't just a lucky guess. Barron had just demonstrated an extraordinary level of intelligence. "Well," Professor Thompson finally muttered, clearing his throat. The class waited in suspense, unsure of what would come next. Would the professor admit he was wrong? Or would he try to cover his tracks? But Barron wasn't done. He stepped back from the board and turned to the class. "It's not just about solving the problem," he said quietly, his voice steady. "It's about seeing the patterns, understanding the logic beneath it all. Math isn't just numbers, it's a way of thinking. Anyone can memorize equations, but real genius lies in being able to connect the dots." A murmur spread through the room as students exchanged glances, finally seeing Barron in a new light. The professor, who had been so quick to dismiss him, now stood speechless. The room had transformed from a place of mockery to one of admiration. After a moment of silence, the professor turned back to the class, his usual bravado gone. "Well, I suppose I've learned something today," he said, his voice more humble than before. But Barron wasn't interested in the apology. His focus was on something greater. "We all have strengths," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "And sometimes, the people we least expect are the ones who have the most to teach us. Just because you don't fit the mold doesn't mean you don't belong here. Don't let anyone define what you're capable of." His words hung in the air, inspiring a wave of reflection in the classroom. For the first time, they all saw Barron not as a name in the media or a stereotype, but as a young man with his own incredible mind, capable of changing everything he touched. And the lesson didn't end there. The professor, who had once ridiculed Barron, now found himself contemplating his own arrogance. his assumptions, and how quickly he had been ready to judge based on appearances. As the bell rang and the students filed out, they left with a new understanding, not just of math, but of the power of perseverance, humility, and the quiet genius that can often be hidden in plain sight. As the days passed, the story of Barron's quiet brilliance began to spread throughout the school. Whispers in the hallways, curious stares in the cafeteria. Everyone wanted to know more about the young man who had outsmarted a professor with ease. But Barron didn't seem interested in the attention. He continued to keep to himself, focused solely on his studies and his own growth. Yet, one afternoon, as he sat in the library, engrossed in a book about advanced theoretical physics, Professor Thompson approached him. The older man had clearly thought about the event for days, and there was something different in his demeanor now. "Barron," he said, his voice quieter, more thoughtful than before, "I owe you an apology." Barron looked up, surprised. The professor never struck him as someone who would admit fault. "I underestimated you," Professor Thompson continued, looking down at his feet. Then meeting Barron's eyes, "I made assumptions based on who you are, not on your abilities, and that was wrong." Barron nodded, but he wasn't interested in dwelling on the past. "It's all right, Professor," he said, his tone as calm as ever. "Sometimes, we all make assumptions. What matters is what we learn from them." The professor stood in silence for a moment, absorbing Barron's wisdom. "You know," he said, "I've been teaching for years. But I don't think I've ever met someone who sees the world quite the way you do. Your perspective is rare, Barron." Barron didn't respond right away. He simply closed the book in front of him and stood up. Maybe that's the key to everything. Seeing the world from a different angle. It's easy to follow the crowd, but true understanding comes from looking beyond what everyone else sees. With that, Barron walked away, leaving the professor to reflect on the young man's words. The conversation was short, but it had made an impact, more than any lesson on math ever could. Weeks went by, and Barron continued to excel. But what was truly remarkable wasn't just his academic performance, it was the way he influenced everyone around him. Students who had once been intimidated by him began to approach him for help. Not just in math, but in life. They sought his advice, his insight, his perspective. Barron had unknowingly become a mentor, teaching others not just through his intelligence, but through his character, humility, and ability to challenge the status quo. It wasn't long before Professor Thompson, who had once been Barron's biggest skeptic, approached him again. This time, he wasn't asking for an apology. Instead, he had a proposition. "Barron," the professor began, "I've been thinking a lot about the way you approach problems, the way you challenge assumptions. I'd like you to consider a special project, one that would involve working alongside me, pushing the boundaries of what we know. What do you think?" Barron looked at him, a hint of a smile appearing on his face. "I think that sounds like a challenge I'm ready for," he said. And so, together, Barron and Professor Thompson embarked on a new journey, one that would change not only their lives but the way they viewed the world around them. But what neither of them knew was that this collaboration would lead to discoveries far beyond what either could have imagined. It wasn't just about solving complex equations anymore, it was about changing the very way people thought, questioned, and saw the world. As the weeks unfolded, Barron and Professor Thompson threw themselves into their new project with a shared fervor. They worked late into the night in the university's research lab, surrounded by chalkboards filled with equations and theories that seemed to defy the very laws of what they thought was possible. Barron's natural ability to see patterns where others saw chaos began to unlock solutions to problems that had stumped some of the brightest minds in academia. One evening, as Barron sketched a particularly complex model, Professor Thompson paused to look at him, his face illuminated by the dim glow of a desk lamp. "You know, Barron," he said slowly, "I've seen a lot of students come and go over the years. But you have a way of seeing the impossible as just another challenge to conquer. I've never met anyone like you." Barron smiled faintly but didn't look up from his work. "It's not about seeing the impossible," he replied. "It's about learning how to approach problems differently. There's always more than one way to look at something. If you only stick to the path everyone else is walking, you'll miss what's lying just outside the trail." Professor Thompson, still amazed at Barron's insight, leaned back in his chair. You know, Barron, I think you're teaching me just as much as I'm teaching you. This project, it's not just about the research anymore. It's about changing how we think, how we question everything we take for granted. You've made me realize how limited my own thinking had become. Barron didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the equations on the chalkboard. There was a moment of silence before he spoke again. That's the key, isn't it? We limit ourselves by thinking we know everything. We're all guilty of it. We think we have the answers before we've even asked the right questions. The professor sat there, contemplating Barron's words. For the first time, he truly understood the depth of Barron's genius. It wasn't just in his ability to solve equations, it was in his way of thinking. His capacity to look at the world through a lens that most people could never even imagine. As the project progressed, Barron's influence continued to ripple outward. His classmates, once intimidated by him, began to seek his guidance. Not just in math, but in how to approach challenges in their own lives. He became a quiet force of inspiration, challenging the status quo in ways that no one had expected. And while he continued to excel academically, Barron found more satisfaction in helping others unlock their own potential than in accolades or recognition. One day, as Barron and Professor Thompson sat at a conference presenting their groundbreaking findings to a room full of academics, Barron's mind was somewhere else. He wasn't interested in the applause or the validation. Instead, he thought back to the day when the professor had mocked him in class. To think that just a few months ago, the same man who had doubted him now stood beside him, presenting the very work they had created together. It was then that Barron realized something profound. It wasn't just about proving people wrong. It was about showing them the possibilities they never thought existed. And in doing so, he had learned the greatest lesson of all, the power of humility. The strength in quiet confidence. And the ability to inspire others not through words, but through actions. As the conference came to an end and the applause died down, Barron looked at Professor Thompson, who was standing beside him, smiling with pride. We did it, the professor said, his voice filled with awe. You did it. Barron nodded, but his eyes were already on the next challenge ahead. There was always more to learn, always more to discover, and he knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. As Barron and Professor Thompson continued their journey, they embarked on a new phase of their research, one that would take them beyond the boundaries of academia. The groundbreaking theories they had developed had begun to attract attention from the world's top scientists, institutions, and even government agencies. The possibilities were endless, and the potential to change the world seemed more tangible with each passing day. Yet, through all the accolades, Barron remained unchanged. He stayed focused on the work, not for fame or recognition, but because of his genuine passion for discovery and the desire to challenge the way the world thought about science, mathematics, and human potential. One evening, as Barron sat in his office reviewing their latest findings, he received a call from a well-known researcher who had been following their progress. Barron, the voice on the other end said, I've been reading about your work with Professor Thompson. You've really shaken things up. I think you're on the verge of something truly revolutionary. You should consider presenting your theories at the Global Summit next year. It could change everything. Barron paused, staring at the phone for a moment. The thought of presenting on a global stage was tempting. But it wasn't the recognition that excited him. It was the idea that their discoveries could help others, inspire others, and push humanity forward. I'll think about it, Barron replied calmly, then hung up. He sat back in his chair, reflecting on everything that had led to this point. He had come a long way from the young man who was dismissed by a professor for being just the son of a billionaire. He had proven that it wasn't background or expectations that defined a person, it was their mind, their determination, and their willingness to think differently. The next day, Barron and Professor Thompson stood at the podium at the Global Summit. The room was filled with the world's most brilliant minds, and as Barron looked out at the sea of faces, he felt a sense of peace. He wasn't there to prove anyone wrong anymore. He was there to share the discoveries they had made, to inspire others to think beyond what was known, and to show them that greatness could come from the most unexpected places. As Barron took the microphone, his voice echoed through the room. Calm and steady. "We all have something unique to offer," he began. "It doesn't matter where you come from or what others think you're capable of. What matters is how you approach the world, how you challenge what's in front of you, and how you use your gifts to help others see the world differently." The crowd was silent, captivated by his words. Barron's message wasn't just about science or math. It was about the power of perseverance, of challenging assumptions, and of never letting others define your potential. He had come full circle, from a young man underestimated by many to someone who now stood before the world, sharing his knowledge and vision. As Barron finished his speech, the applause that followed wasn't just for his intellect, it was for his heart, his humility, and his unwavering belief that everyone has the ability to make a difference. The world had begun to see Barron Trump not as a name in the headlines, but as a visionary in his own right. And as the lights dimmed and the audience began to rise from their seats, Barron looked at Professor Thompson. The professor, who had once doubted him, now smiled with pride. "We did it," Barron said, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. Professor Thompson nodded, a hint of a smile on his face. "No, Barron, you did it. You showed us all that genius isn't about fitting in. It's about standing out." As Barron walked off the stage, he knew this was only the beginning. He had changed the way people saw him. But more importantly, he had changed the way people saw the world, and that was a legacy far greater than any recognition he could ever receive. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope Barron's inspiring journey has left you feeling motivated and ready to chase your own dreams. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. And, of course, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more amazing content like this. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more incredible stories. Stay tuned, and remember, anything is possible when you believe in yourself.